What energy should you bring to the start of your novel? And today we are going to hear David Foster Wallace himself advise you, a writer in the literary renaissance, on the main framework you should follow. And Wallace is a very interesting case study in this respect because when you look at Infinite Jest, The Broom of the System, The Pale King, and even brief interviews, they are long and arduous books. And for most of us out here, who are writing literary fiction, one of our main phobias is that people aren't going to care enough to want to read our work, that they are too dumb or don't have the attention span to follow what is exactly going on. And if you guys don't already know, my name is Ian, and on this channel, we cover everything related to David Foster Wallace. In the playlist down below, you will find over 80 videos, yes, 80 videos on Wallace. And that library is growing every single week. And so, enough for me. Let us now hear from Wallace. But the job of the first 8 pages is not to have the reader want to throw the book at the wall during the first 8 pages. And this quote is a transcript from a workshop, a fiction workshop that David Foster Wallace was teaching. And to depict this point, Wallace was running around the classroom all excited, getting down on one knee, and showing people the energy you should have at the start of your novel. And this mentality is more important than ever because writers have been broken. Writers in 2024 feel so disillusioned that they start acting in idiotic ways. They say everyone out there is too dumb or doesn't have the attention span to read my work. Or they look at traditional publishers and see that 65% of books published by the top publishers in the world sell less than 1,000 copies, and 98% of books published by the top publishers sell less than 5,000 copies. And so they become hopeless. But within that hopelessness, most of the time, a resentment builds that creates a hollow-shelled monster of self-interest. This mentality where an author says, it doesn't matter, this is my art, I'm just doing it, I'm just releasing it. And traditionally, this mentality was checked by the publisher first, or by the agent, because in time immemorial, you would have to send your work to a slush pile, and it would have to be good. You would have to show merit to be able to get across the finish line. And I've worked at literary magazines before, and when I read submissions, when you would get submissions, you would only read a paragraph or two and know if the story was going to be good. You can tell almost automatically how good a writer is. And so when you look at a novel like Infinite Jest, which is over 1,000 pages and has some very frustrating and long sections, something that Wallace did to, first of all, get published, to get all the way back in the 90s, a 6-figure advance, was to put the most interesting thing up front. The start of Infinite Jest with Helen Condenza at the University of Tucson, having an interview for a scholarship, and I won't really spoil anything, is the most funny and entertaining part of the book. It really encapsulates almost everything in the novel. Family trauma, addiction, isolation, and it isn't written in a complicated way. Wallace isn't breaking out his various dialects that he uses. He's not using flowery language. He's just creating interest in the story. And when you look at a lot of his short stories, he does something similar on a more macro scale. And so I think that self-published and modern authors think of guys like me who get this submission at a literary magazine and read the first 2 paragraphs. I'm like, okay, I'm not interested. It's gone. And say, well, if you kept reading to page 8, then you would see the crazy stuff. And so this system of people just throwing stuff away is dumb, and it is dumb, but it's the same thing about this video. Already, you guys, over 50% of the people who started this video are already gone, if not more. And I could sit and complain and be like, how dumb are they? Or I could accept the objective fact that unless I have a video essay format with animations and bright lights, that most people are going to leave. And the same is true of your novel. And so if you are going to create a novel, which hopefully should be taking you over 3,000 hours of dedicated deep work, hours with no distractions to finish, then you should want people to read it. And the average reader, even if they pay $15 for your novel, is just like the person reading the stuff in a slush pile, the agent, or someone at a literary magazine. That system was there for a reason. Because the reason that some authors can get away without starting their novels with an explosion or really creating interest at the start of the novel is that they've developed trust in the community. When I sit and open a Cormac McCarthy novel, I understand that it may take a while to get going. But Cormac McCarthy's first 5 novels also sold under 2,500 copies. And the thing about McCarthy is that he was living in a time where publishing houses were willing to support and lose some money on people like a Cormac McCarthy. There were editors like Albert Erskine who appreciated high literary merit, but I would challenge you guys right now to go look at the Twitter profiles of all the editors at Random House and at Penguin and Simon and Schuster. You can find all of them and look at their Twitter profiles and be like, okay. And then look at the CEO and be like, are they really going to support what I'm trying to do if it's not following a general model? And so if you want to rebel and you're going to say, well, I don't need to react to these individuals, I don't need to write for the everyday average person, then you have to ask yourself, then what is the point? In the sense that Franz Kafka, John Kennedy Toole, Emily Dickinson, even Cormac McCarthy and countless other authors who wrote didn't necessarily care about the outcome. They were all geniuses, but they became famous later on in their careers or after they died because they had someone like John Kennedy Toole's mother, in his case, who were willing to kind of share their work and find someone to publish it. And now with the internet, you could post your short story, even your novel online, and there's this false assumption a lot of people hold that one day it may get discovered, that one day you may get discovered. But with 4 million books being published every single year, and how many more short stories, poems, and blog posts online, it is almost impossible that your work will ever be discovered or cared about. And if even one or two people find it and care about it, that anyone will care. I occasionally, probably once a year, receive an email from people who are doing this. They say, I've discovered this genius in North Dakota who's died and left his book of poems, and he's better than anyone you've ever talked about. And here are some. And guys, I just delete the email. It sounds bad, but we live in 2024, and I think going into the future in a trust economy. And you build trust with your audience by showing them your work for free, by posting online, by communicating with them one-on-one. And then you write a longer piece that eventually has the ability to expand and maybe grow beyond and outside of yourself. But you have to imagine, if you want to have people read your work, that most people, even if you build the community, let's say you followed the game plan I talk about on my free writing school. If you guys want to go join my free writing school, the link is down below. But the game plan is that eventually, over the course of 5 or 10 years, if you get 1,000 people to pay $5 a month for your free writing, then you can be a full-time author. And that's easier than selling 12,000 books every single year, especially in the literary fiction or poetry space. But let's say you reach that point and you have 1,000 true fans and someone's on the periphery and you sell 1,500 copies of your novel. Well, then I think your hope would be that those 1,500 people, through word of mouth and reviews, would eventually, expand your reach, and maybe you could sell tens of thousands of novels. And that's obviously the end goal, but the ability for you to do that requires you most of the time to follow a certain protocol until you reach a threshold, which is somewhat undetermined, when you can just write and be as experimental as you want to, and the trust of your community and the awards you will get and stuff will push you over the edge. And so the other thing that's missing in a lot of writers' life is obviously the editor. That all these great books behind me had an editor that was paid a significant amount of money, probably over $10,000 in today's value, to edit this work. And the concessions had to be made. Things were changed. Sometimes for the worse, most of the time for the better. But writers, and this is something I'll have to talk about another time, are honestly some of the more cheap people I've ever known. They're some of the more, I should say, not willing to invest in themselves and their work of any artistic pursuit. Like a lot of directors and stuff, and even artists. I mean, a lot of people in other fields of art have had to like self-fund or go into debt or put their, mortgage under to like release their work of art. In writers, when you say, hey, you should pay someone $10,000 to edit your work that you've spent 5,000 hours on. You should pay someone $1,000 for the cover, $500 for the formatting, and maybe $1,000 for some consultations to figure out how to market it. If you say that to them, they will lose it. There's a total block there that I've personally seen when talking to people. I'm like, okay, what's your launch plan? And the point of all that, the point of the cover, the point of the formatting, the point of the editor is that they will hopefully prevent the reader from throwing the book against the wall at the start. Because it's not just about being simple. Like, I know plenty of people who write simple stories. I'm just like, I don't care. It's about entertaining them and drawing them in and hooking them. And that is one of the hardest things to do, everyone. It's one of the hardest things to do in life. As I'm sure you guys know, how many of you guys have cared about a book or cared about something a lot and tried to get your friends and family to care about it? It's almost impossible. And it feels like you're like on a soapbox being a preacher and you have to be like, hey, if you read this, join my... Like, here's a great example and a great plug. I, over on my Substack, run a David Foster Wallace course. I have probably over 20 hours on David Foster Wallace content. I'm doing an Infinite Jest course right now that is over halfway done, and I've covered a lot of his essays, and I'm planning to do hundreds of hours on Wallace over on the Right Conscious Substack. But I also run book clubs over there, and I've asked my mom almost my entire life to read some of the books that I'm reading, and she's like, "No, I don't read books like that." She's a huge reader. She reads 200 plus books a year, but she likes mysteries and more entertaining type of books. And so I eventually convinced her after over a decade to join my book club. And now she's loving it. Now she's reading literary fiction. She's like, "Oh my God, have you heard of this book, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell? It's amazing." I'm like, "Oh my God, you're reading Cloud Atlas? I've told you to read that 10 years ago." Anyway, but it's hard to make people care. And sometimes it's literally a decade-long effort. My friend Andy, who may be watching right now, is a high school buddy of mine. And I've been trying to get him into fish because he's a big deadhead since 2012. And finally, in 2024, this year, a couple months ago, he was like, "Damn, I finally get it." And I've sent that fool at least 500 links of fish songs. And you also have to remember that the average everyday reader may be reading your work in a very chaotic environment, or they may be very tired. A lot of people read before bed or read at lunch on their work or on their phone. And so they are not caffeinated and fully focused. So at the start, you need to make them care and do whatever you can and pull whatever trick you can to make them care. And it's not above you to do that. It's not above you to make some artistic concessions. I hate when people say life is about compromise, but when it comes to connecting with other people and making deals and merging with others and dancing with other energies, it does require compromise. You have to get into the beat of something larger than yourself. And so most of the time, authors actually have something in their work or have written something before in a novel that is very interesting and they should have at the start of their novel, but they resist it. And their ego, their brain, their logic tells them, "No, you need to do this." And one of the best ways to figure this out, if you don't have an editor, if you don't have the $12,000, which is fine, like I said, I think you should have that, especially if you're working on a book for 5 years. I think that most people with some saving could probably save, even $1,000 or $1,500 a year for their eventual release of their novel. But maybe I'm wrong. Writing is free, like literally. You could pay $50 for Scrivener or just use Google Docs, have an internet connection. You just use paper if you need to and use a library computer and, finish a novel. I'm sure your family and everyone else would be very happy that you were saving money for something that you really cared about. But if you were following the rule of 400 that I go over in my free writing school and you were building a community with other people, you could talk to people. Like, for instance, I'm going to be releasing a book soon and I'm going to be consulting some people about, hey, what poems should I put at the start of the book? And giving them some options and running them through some tests. The same can be done with your novel. You can show people multiple first chapters that are short, just the first 1,000 words, and show them 4 or 5 different options, which you should have anyway, which you should have perfected and crafted because the start is everything, and say, which one is the best? And hey, I'll help you too. Send me 5,000 words of your writing, and I'll edit and critique you and do that too. And you know how effective that, over the course of 10 or 20 people, a winner will emerge. And so all of this can be done for free. And so, boom, everybody, that is what I'm calling you guys to do. If we're going to create a literary renaissance, we need to transcend our logic. You need to understand that people aren't judging you on the first 10 pages, that people would rather be hooked and care and be shown little tricks and told a more traditional story instead of having a bunch of world building or a complicated plot or perspective shifts. And I wish it was different. I wish every single reader was conscious and you could pull what Cormac McCarthy did at the start of The Orchard Keeper. But you can do all of that later in the novel, everyone. You have over 100,000 words to make people feel that you're really smart and really talented and whatever else you want people to feel about you. Because let me tell you something, you guys. In some of those literary magazine sessions where I would be reading like fiction stuff, I would sometimes come across a story that was poorly written, that was a terrible idea. But just the way that it was written, the framing, the energy that the author brought to it would make me read the entire thing. And I would read the entire thing and then throw it in the no pile because I kind of knew that, the head editor, when it got, they'd be like, no way. But it's not about microing every sentence and making everything perfect. It's about a vibe. It's about a framing. It's about the general energy of the start. And when that's good, things go good. When I think of Cormac McCarthy, a lot of people view, including myself, like The Road and No Country for Old Men as some of his weaker novels. But if you look at the start of those novels, they are very traditional. In the start of No Country for Old Men, we have Sheriff Bell reminiscing about putting a boy in the gas chamber. We have at the start of The Road, kind of this small introduction to this, apocalyptic world. It's very good stuff. It's very simple. But suddenly you want to see more. Excuse me, read more. So thank you guys for being here, and I will see everyone in my next Wallace video.